Hey guys, our friend Marshall Kosloff, he's going to be conducting interviews with experts and newsmakers for us here on the Breaking Points channel. We're really excited.
Yep, here it is.
Hey, what's up, Breaking Points? I'm joined by Politico's Derek Robertson. We're here to talk about Disney and the fight that's happening in Florida right now. Krystal and Saagar have obviously covered the details of the bill, the specific parts that are being thought about. But I thought with Derek, he's done some really great writing at Politico about the broader structure that's impacting the politics of a lot of this debate. So I'd love to just get in and start with this idea of all the different things that you and I would be talking about post 2015. You'd think that a war against Disneyland would be at the bottom of that list. What's going on here at a broader level?
Well, I sort of wrote about this to lead off my most recent Politico Mag piece. And first, thanks for inviting me on. I enjoy the show. But, bashing Disney used to be something that liberals did. First of all, it's a massive, corporate behemoth that is sort of omnipresent in American life and culture. It's a global hegemon, basically.
It owns everything.
Yeah, it owns everything. It used to be viewed as an avatar of right-wing culture too, in terms of having kind of simplified princess storylines that didn't encourage women's agency and things like that. Obviously, culture has shifted a lot in recent years. But I think that the key difference in why this is a political hot button issue today is that ambitious conservatives, I think, see an opportunity to bolster their bona fides with cultural conservatives by taking on big corporations and saying, you know what, if you are going to do things that we find culturally objectionable, we are not so beholden to the kind of Reaganite status quo that we're not willing to use the stick of government to punish you in some way. And that's why the right has taken aim at Disney today.
And what I'm trying to understand here is what exactly has Disney specifically done to provoke the backlash?
Yeah, so in this case, it's they released a statement opposing Governor Ron DeSantis, well, I guess the Florida legislatures, but he's signed it into law, a bill about gender and sexuality education in Florida schools that specifically barred teachers from discussing homosexuality or gender identity with kids in kindergarten to third grade. It also limited discussion of those topics above third grade to things that are, quote, age appropriate, which is obviously an incredibly subjective classification. At Disney, you have lots of the employees of the company. It's a company that has, I think, 200,000 employees or something like that. But many of the influential employees there are liberal. They obviously oppose this bill. There was a great deal of internal pressure for Disney leadership and their CEO, Bob Chapek, to release a statement opposing it. And they did. And that made Ron DeSantis very angry, or more realistically, it made him see a political opportunity to prove to the conservative base that, he was willing to stand up for their, rights for their kids not to be taught about gender identity in their second grade classroom, theoretically. So it's over this one bill, but it has kind of ballooned into a broader culture war topic, as these things tend to do.
You just got at a real tension there, which is that initially, Disney was not particularly aggressive or vocal about opposing the bill. But once that didn't happen, actual employees were pushing aggressively for the company to take a stand, make a statement. How do companies navigate that? Because it's not as if this is some amorphous, Bob Chapek, the CEO of Disney, did not wake up wanting to do this very clearly. So how are they navigating that part?
So, that's an interesting question. It's something I actually just interviewed a professor at Indiana University about this for a totally separate story that had nothing to do with this. But we were talking about the tensions within corporations and nonprofits in this case. But it doesn't really matter. This is an issue that every institution has to face, which is how beholden are you to your rank and file, and how beholden are you to the institution's wealthy donors, politicians who kind of protect your status as a private institution? And it's incredibly difficult, especially at Disney. This guy who's their new CEO, who replaced Bob Iger, who was he was seen as a real sort of creative type and a guy who made Disney into what it is today, in large part. Chapek, on the other hand, is sort of a more corporate figure. Probably would have been more. I'm speculating here, but would have been more reluctant initially to wade into this than somebody like Iger would. But at the end of the day,
Bob Iger wanted to be president, so
right,
and he was and he wanted to be the ambassador to China, so he was a much more politically oriented person.
100%, yes, and a dyed-in-the-wool liberal for the most part. So here you have there's a tension, exactly like you described, which is that the people at Disney who were vocally upset about this don't reflect a majority of Florida voters. In fact, there's polling that I cited in my magazine piece that showed that when given kind of the specific language of this bill, most Florida voters, including Democrats, if I remember correctly, thought it was pretty much okay. But the people who are upset about this are really influential. And if you don't have hyper sort of super liberal creative types at your company, if you're a company like Disney, you don't have a company. So you can't afford to alienate them. And I think that's why this ended up happening and how it became, I think Disney's hand was forced for that reason.
It's really interesting because we're recording this as news that Elon Musk is set to purchase Twitter is coming out. I found a way to tie that in here, but the thing that's coming through for what you're saying is, in that case, the argument that a lot of people make is the people who are going to be most pissed at the decision that Elon are going to make are not going to be the engineers. They're not going to be the product people. They're going to be the content moderators, the folks who are in the more soft sides of the company. But with Disney specifically here, to your point, it's not as if there's a vast pool of Disney Imagineers or creative types who are likely to be okay with not taking a stand. So but here's the actual question then. What is Disney's reaction and just corporate America generally been to this phenomenon?
That's a good question. I get the sense, as I've been following this story, most of it has had to do, there's been a lot of like wonky disentangling of like, what is the Reedy Creek Improvement District? And how much money in property taxes will people end up paying if Disney loses its special sort of quasi NGO status that it has in Florida? I get the sense that, this is a pretty static situation. The bill, is law. There's nothing, Disney is not going to, barring some unforeseen development, Disney is not going to pick up sticks and move to Reading, Pennsylvania, as Matt Iglesias suggested on Twitter, although that would be incredibly entertaining. I think they're responding by just saying, I'm not like plugged in at Disney. I don't have sources there or anything, but I get the sense that, I think they literally did all they could, which is not really that much at the end of the day. Disney is a powerful and influential company, but there's not enough. They can put out a statement and make their employees feel like they support them and, that they're supported within the company and that they're, protecting their rights, but there's nothing additionally to be done. And therefore you find yourself in this kind of policy and culture war stalemate where, DeSantis is bashing the piñata and racking up points with Trump fans and conservative activists. Disney makes its own side feel like their needs are met and their concerns are heard, and the bill will become law and people will continue going to Disney World. And probably a few years from now, we'll forget that this ever happened, which is not really like a dramatic or satisfying answer, but probably the most likely scenario.
It's just funny because there were a couple rather cringe tweets by activists on Twitter who were, let's say, overreading into the ability of a single corporation to affect the political circumstances by saying, Ron DeSantis, you've screwed up. Now the full force of Disney is going to come in and support candidates that oppose you and all these different bits. And I think, honestly, this is a story that, like, separate your views on the LGBTQ issue just shows that actually, like, corporations couldn't actually do that. And actually, if anything, I think if Disney or anyone affiliated with Disney tried to put serious amounts of money into Texas races in order to punish, change, impact, it almost certainly would provoke even more backlash and almost certainly would be something that, honestly, if I'm Ron DeSantis and I'm thinking about 2024, I would love that if I were him.
Oh yeah, it gives you a good foil. It's a good case study in the limits of corporate activism. You compare this to other other issues like, I lived in Indiana for a time, and obviously there was a huge controversy around the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which critics viewed would have allowed companies to discriminate against trans and LGBT people. There was a huge, the corporate community in Indiana roundly just rejected this, sort of like loudly and in unison. And it was seen as a huge political misstep by Mike Pence. It was, of course, one of the, this is almost his origin story in terms of becoming Trump's vice president, because it made him so unpopular within the state that he was widely seen as cruising toward a re-election loss. So you have that, and then you have, of course, there's the famous North Carolina bathroom bill issue that was also kind of a disaster for the GOP. But this is not that.
Why not? Like, what's the difference?
I honestly think, and I'm not on the ground in Florida, so I can't say this, but if you do look at the polling around this, I think it's the fact that I don't think people are that opposed to the bill on the ground. It doesn't seem like, and it's not as easy to define. Ironically, the people who have sort of heaped onto Disney and characterized them as like groomers or whatever are making this much more of an emotionally peaked topic than it otherwise would be. Because I think that as I wrote in my piece, the average person, if you tell them, your kid's not going to learn what homosexuality is in school until after third grade, they'd go, I think that's pretty reasonable. So I think that this particular bill is just not hostile enough to really incense people or to strike people as just fundamentally unfair in a way that I think those other bills did. And you can debate, that's an entirely different subject. You can debate, whether they are or not, but politically it doesn't seem to have taken as such, and therefore there's DeSantis is not backing down, which also gets at the other side of this issue, is that there's a far larger political incentive for somebody like DeSantis to harp on this than there was in the pre-Trump era, when I think social conservatism was seen as more of a losing card to play in statewide or national elections.
So let's talk about the future then, because you've talked about this idea of barstool conservatives. How there's this market of folks who are more for free speech. They like Dave Portnoy. They like Elon Musk. This is, I suspect, once again, to your point, this is broadly popular. But I see very clearly, as someone who focuses on the right a lot of folks who say this is a demonstration of the fact that the right doesn't have to be on defensive when it comes to social issues anymore. What do you think the implications are going to be moving forward, given just the way activists are actively seeing this?
Well, I see it as a little bit of a cautionary tale. And this was kind of the point of my essay, which is that while it may be narrowly true that the Florida bill in question is relatively popular, it's also true that sort of gay rights are extremely popular and have been, support for them has been climbing steeply for the past decade, unbroken. And I think that, there was a good, I kind of alluded to the activist tactic in my piece of seizing on one particular controversy like this and using it to kind of crowbar open a wider conversation, like you saw around critical race theory last year. And like, I think conservative sort of activist entrepreneurs are trying to do around homosexuality and just sex education and things like that today. But I think that this is a different environment than last year. Everybody likes to point to Glenn Youngkin as this sort of example of how a relatively milquetoast politician can bolster his standing by beating the culture war drum very loudly. But as we've talked about before, Youngkin's success can largely be attributed to dissatisfaction with COVID-19 management in a liberal run state like Virginia. That issue is not really top of mind for voters anymore. And furthermore, if you're deciding now that your wedge, as there was a report in the New York Times by Trip Gabriel where he was talking about Rufo and his attempts to do this. So if you've decided that your wedge issue now is that you're going to try to like win back ground on, the traditional, supporting the traditional Christian heterosexual family or whatever, I think that's a little bit of a tougher sell than convincing people that liberals made a hash of COVID-19 and that you don't want your kid to have a worksheet that says he's racist or whatever. I think that, and to tie this back to your invocation of the quote unquote barstool Republicans, those voters tend to be far more socially liberal than the conservative activist Republican base. So I think that activists like Rufo and the kind of like the groomer gang, the Mike Cernoviches of the world, might be overplaying their hand a little bit if they think that they're going to turn America against gay rights en masse. There's just no evidence that that's a winning topic at all.
Well, this is a story that we're going to hear a lot more from. You invoked the idea that this is similar to the conservative backlash to the NFL. So it's just very clear that a whole space of American life that we thought was uncontestably uncontroversial has been opened up. So I'm sure I'll have you back on at some point to talk about this in some other context, some other state. Derek, thank you so much for joining us on Breaking Points.
Yeah, thanks, Marshall.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.